Welcome to the Crown City Podcast. I'm your host, James DiPietro. From Pasadena, California, this is a podcast about building a community for all. On this episode, I'm proud to welcome award-winning author Naomi Hirahara. Naomi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, James.
Well, I'm so excited to have you, and welcome to Pasadena Media. You've been here before, which I'm excited to learn about. And so to get us started, I thought I would have you share a little bit about your background, because I know you're from Pasadena and the South Pasadena area.
I'm a total Deanan because I was actually born in Pasadena at Huntington Hospital, but lived in Altadena. Then our family moved to South Pasadena. I went to other places, and now I currently live in Pasadena, not far from the studio.
Yeah, you said you were on your way, and I'm like, I don't know how far you are, but you were like 5 seconds away.
Yeah, exactly. I could have walked, but I didn't.
So you didn't go very far, but you studied, you went to Stanford, and then you went to did work in Ghana as well. So talk a little bit about kind of your education and then your work in Ghana.
So my mother is from Japan, and so on a regular basis, she would go to Japan, and I would accompany her as a child. So I was really interested in global issues. So my major was international relations, and I was a bleeding heart. I wanted to save the world, and so for my major, I decided to go to a third world country. So I went to Ghana, which is on the Gold Coast of Africa. And I learned a lot. People there were going, Naomi, what are you doing here? Like, I wasn't a medical professional. I like to read and, I read and write. And unfortunately, I got really ill with every single disease you could imagine, including malaria and shingles. And I just felt that I was being pushed like, Naomi, why don't you look into your own heritage? And in a way, I was kind of running away from being, my Japanese, or my mother being from Japan and my dad being raised here. And I'm born here and raised in Japan. So I decided, okay, let me take a deep dive into my Japanese heritage.
So who were some of your early mentors that were really important to you and why?
The earliest mentor actually was my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Knutson at Loma Alta Elementary School, which is no longer there, but it was right there on Loma Alta in Altadena. And she was one who really, fourth grade was when we started to study about Japan. And I feel, she really affirmed me of who I was. And I would take like spelling words instead of making sentences. I made whole stories. So she kind of opened the door for me to start to, write fiction. I think later, there was just an assortment of people that came into my life. At Stanford, I was involved. They had a Asian American theater project, and David Henry Wang, he won Tony Awards and things like that. He had started it. And so, believe it or not, I acted some. I was a ribbon dancer behind a scrim, and then I was a lead in a play called Gold Watch. And and then that was in the 80s, so there was a coffee shop, so I'd read like my poetry, at the coffee shop. So I was just thinking, well, I'm in a place like Stanford, so I'll be a lawyer, and then I'll retire. I'll be a John Grisham. I'll retire, and then I'll, write novels. But it didn't quite come, my path didn't go that way.
Well, before you started a career as a mystery writer, you were a reporter and the editor of the Rafu Shimpo. Mm-hmm. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, you are.
Okay, good. Which is translated as the Los Angeles Area Newspaper, which is the nation's leading Japanese American newspaper. So when did you shift from international relations to reporting?
Well, after I graduated from Stanford, I spent a year doing intensive language study. It was a program that Stanford administers. They still do, and currently it's in Yokohama. And I wrote a short story in Japanese, and I go, I kind of like, this is what I meant to do. But I wasn't on the fast track at Stanford when I was undergrad. I like people who are very ambitious, they got the internships like, at USA Today or, LA Times. And I wasn't doing any of that. So I was going, well, when I got back to LA, I need some sort of living. And I had sent my short story in Japanese to the Rafushimpo, and they came back. They go, hey, we need we need a reporter. You want to work here? And at that time, I was like, oh, this is like, just a rinky-dink, newspaper, and it's in Little Tokyo, bordering, Skid Row. So, I wasn't that excited, but it turned out to be like the best decision career-wise and creatively that I ever made.
So what kind of stories did you kind of cover at the newspaper?
Everything. I know my first article was about a woman drowning. So this is like crime, a woman drowning in her pool. And it was back then we kind of measured articles by inches, and I think it was only like a 5-inch story. And since I was being trained on the job, it took me like the whole day just to write that. But it was I think working at the paper, it opened me up to places outside of Pasadena. I was driving to communities where a lot of Japanese Americans had first come, like Boyle Heights or Gardena and the Crenshaw area. So I was going out of these neighborhoods that I personally had I hadn't grown up in these places, but other people had. And it was such a great initiation for me. And also, I eventually became editor. And so I oversaw like a staff of 10 people. So I think leadership wise, it was really an important adventure, as well as I was working at the paper with the Los Angeles riots happened, and and thinking of ways, how do we keep our reporters safe yet still cover the story. And so many very important seminal events kind of happen, including the redress and reparation movements, where we compensated Japanese Americans who had been in the World War II camps. So all of that just kind of being on the front lines of all of that activity was an invaluable education for me, as well as I had to write. You like a lot of people ask me, well, what's your writing practice? And I do have one, but at the paper, I knew I can't wait for the muse. I can't wait for the right kind of environment, music, or you just have to like sit down and get the job done.
Because you're a writer and an editor. So, I mean, you could do both.
Yeah. And one of my older friends, Henry Morey, he had been an editor actually right after World War II at the paper. He had a column called Meeting the Deadline. And basically, that's what we had to do. So I think has helped me as a book, author as well.
Well, we are recording this in May. And you are very generous because you're taking time out of your schedule, because you actually have a manuscript due. We're going to talk about this later on in the podcast. But you have a manuscript due at the end of the month, which I'm amazed that you made time out of your schedule. You're like, oh, I have a manuscript due at the end of the month. I'm like, I don't know how you were able to make time for us, so I appreciate it. But that kind of segues into mystery writing. So in 2004, you published The Summer of the Big Bocce, which served as the beginning of a 7-book series. And the character of Moss was famously inspired by your father, who you wanted to give credit as an underestimated hero. How did you decide that Moss would be your protagonist?
Well, as you mentioned, I was very tight with my father. And he was a working gardener. He was a maintenance gardener, for my whole life. I guess he did retire, in his late 70s, but so he was one of these ubiquitous at the time, like in the 1960s and 70s, on the streets of Pasadena. You probably see a Chevrolet or a Ford pickup truck. My dad's was kind of this greenish color, look like kind of mold. I love that color actually, with a bunch of gardening tools in the back. And, so that was that was my, my father and my family's livelihood. And 1 out of 10 Japanese American men after World War II were gardeners. So it was the occupation that really sustained the larger community. My father, he was an atomic bomb survivor. So I think that, when people would pass him by, unloading his tools or working the lawn, that, people wouldn't give him a second thought, but I was thinking, this man has, he's an American atomic bomb survivor from Hiroshima. He has a story to tell. And, but, because that he, was kind of a man of two countries, he was smart, but he wasn't super, he didn't master either language. So it was kind of like at home, I heard kind of a mix of Japanese and English. So, I really wanted to give my father a voice. But I had no idea that it would kind of grow into a 7-book series. I thought it would be one book, but it kind of expanded.
So that kind of, my next question was there a plan to write 7 novels? And it sounds like there wasn't a plan, really.
No. But when I mean, that first book, Summer of the Big Bachi, and bachi means what goes around comes around. So it's like karma within a few minutes. When that took me 15 years, so I wanted to write it in my late 20s, and I was working at the paper, and I worked in PR and other jobs as well. So it took me a while because I didn't know what I was doing. But it was ambitious because I have flashbacks from Hiroshima. But it does take place in Altadena, so it's very local. Yeah.
Yes.
So, but finally, actually, when it morphed into a mystery, that's when it was easier to sell. First, it was kind of literary fiction, whatever that means. And then it was an imprint of Random House. But they said if they were to buy that book, they wanted a new manuscript within a year. So this is where, like, making the deadline, it's like, okay, you want the book, I'm going to have to, even though the first one took 15 years, I'm going to have to figure out a way, to write the second one, within that time period.
So was it supposed to be a mystery from the get-go?
Summer of the Big Bachi was not.
Oh, really?
It morphed. Yeah. So actually I had 2 characters. I had a doctor from Hiroshima, a young guy, and it was a dual point of views. But then when, I even went to a writing fellowship, a 9-month-long fellowship in Wichita, Kansas. I was so dedicated to this book, and my writing mentor at the time, she still is, Virginia Stem Owens. She was telling me, Naomi, Moss is your lead character. So I had to do major surgery and just remove the other character and just go through Moss's investigation of this mystery just through his eyes. I mean, it's third person, that particular book series, but yeah.
How hard was that, removing that character? Because you probably invested a lot of time in that doctor character.
It was hard, but not that hard.
Really?
So that kind of, so Virginia was correct.
Mm.
I mean, if that character was so important, I wouldn't be able to finish a book without him. But she was right. Moss was the foil for the whole story.
So after 7 novels, I mean, how do you say goodbye to a character like Moss?
Well, the whole traditional publishing is very difficult. Yeah, I mean, there's obstacle after obstacle. One of my friends, Gary Phillips, says writing ain't for sissies. I mean, it's like slash publishing. So, I mean, that particular series has gone through, I think, 3 to 4 different publishers. I lost a lot of my acquiring editors because they moved to another publishing house. I've had multiple agents. So I could have self-published the latter books, but I really, because I've only pretty much been published traditionally. I wanted to keep it in that world. And so I wanted some control. And I thought, seven's a good number. It's an eternal number. And I really wanted to end well. I don't know, just like, we watch certain series on, streaming that are favorites that starts really strong, but then it kind of peters out and it just disappears. And it's like, what happened, to these side characters? So I didn't want that to happen. So I really did want the last book to be set in Hiroshima. So that's my character goes back there. And so for that to happen, I needed to kind of have the larger arc kind of mapped out.
You said it took about 15 years to write The Big Bocce.
Mm-hmm.
What role does research play in your writing process?
It's a lot more important now. Actually, with a lot of the Masarai books, I was mining my own family's history. And actually, Moss is a bit of curmudgeon. And my father, he could be that way to certain people, but he wasn't that way to me. But I kind of followed my own father's history kind of closely, just because I didn't want someone to say, well, that couldn't have happened. That character couldn't have come to this country at this time, And then I had written a lot of nonfiction books. I had written a biography of a strawberry grower with Driscoll. So I kind of stole from myself, a lot of those Masarai books. But now I'm really writing things that, are definitely out of my family's experience, and about some things I haven't necessarily written before or, in a nonfiction way. So it's extremely important right now. It's real. And I'm this nerd, research nerd, and, I was a reporter. So I think it just comes natural to me. I sometimes I don't realize like other writers hate research, and when they tell me they do, I go, really? And I go, oh, okay. So, people like writers like me, are not necessarily all that common. Yeah.
I love research. I love diving deep into a subject. That I enjoy so much of that process. So I can relate to kind of the enjoyment of that and kind of letting the research kind of guide the story. Are there specific challenges of writing a mystery versus writing kind of another type of story?
I think, it's just that mystery job. And I've said this before, it's like been the perfect container. And I think, there's some allure, morbid allure of readers in terms of the dead body. You have a dead body in the book and people get interested. Like, what's the story? What happened to that person? Who is he or she? Or, who did this to her? So I think that structure has really been helpful. And also I write about characters who are not necessarily, they're not the Jack Reachers, they're not like, oh, okay, I gotta solve, they're more ordinary people. But then, and so if I just wrote about their ordinary lives, it might be kind of boring. But when there's something at stake, like maybe someone they love has been accused of a crime and they have to take action, I think it just gives the story more agency. And I think that's very important, that kind of movement. So I do think those years of being a reporter and editor have been helpful because people would contact me. You got to really, look into, like I would cover some murder cases like that were in court. You got to really cover this. And it's like, and then, this is a real case. The call girl wife was being accused, and it was actually a gardener who had been killed, and his biological children's like, you got to look into this. But then it's like, well, why are they pressing so hard? Do they really want justice, or is there an ulterior motive? So everybody's kind of like a suspect, like when you're working on those kind of stories as a journalist. And what's interesting is during COVID, I got a chance to talk to Michael Connolly more times than ever, and he's the best-selling, author behind the show Bosch and Lincoln Lawyer and all that. And we figured out we were only like blocks away from each other.
Oh,
And he was at the big LA Times and I was at, Rafu Shimpo in downtown LA, and we, covering our respective, stories, including crime. And I just, and just talking to Michael in terms of his, like everything, like he wrote about COVID. He wrote about he kind of takes his books kind of like a journalistic approach, and it's like whereas some of our other colleagues go, no, that I don't want to write about the pandemic, that's a downer, whereas his like, well, it really happened, so I have to write it.
Right.
And I think with me, like with history, my historical fictions, it's like the same way. It's like this really happened, so I want to follow it, and bring it to people's attention.
Well, I think I really like Michael Connolly, and I loved Bosch. And I loved how it was brought to the small screen. I love the series just because I think it was an ode to Los Angeles, having grown up in Los Angeles. And I think what was enjoyable about that is you got to see Los Angeles in a different way. And what I enjoy about that, and also your books, is that you talk about real places. You bring in Altadena, which for someone that's in back east or in the Midwest, that they don't know, it doesn't ring true to them. But for someone in the area, we can relate to that. We understand kind of the foothills when you talk about the foothills or something like that. You could kind of get the sense of the streets. You could see the pickup driving down the streets in Altadena, like you mentioned, the green pickup truck driving down the street. You could see the lawns being cared for as Moss is doing his yard work. You could picture that in your mind, and it could really the vibrancy really comes to. I mean, you really kind of feel that work, and I think it really comes through the pages really brilliantly. So looking back at, and I know we talk about the Big Bocce a lot, but I mean, I think because it's fresh in my mind because I just read it, and so and it's your first work, first mystery work. How has your writing evolved since? I mean, it was 20 years ago since it came out in 20 years ago. But how has your writing evolved since then, do you think?
It's kind of interesting because I was cleaning out some materials that I had, and I had this board that I would take to different book clubs, and it had my rejection letters. And one of the rejection letters from a large publisher said they liked the Japanese American themes and the setting, but Moss was just too reluctant. He was almost too passive, and they wanted more of a person who, maybe like a Miss Marple, type of character. But I said no, like Moss is not that type of character. So I like the series because of that, because he's really unusual, very reluctant. But I will have to say that since then I have kind of created characters that are a little more active, well, I don't know if you're going to touch upon upon Aki Ito and Clark in Division, but she's not necessarily a trained sleuth either. But it's just, in terms of a longer series, it's just really tough to keep having it's the Jessica Fletcher syndrome. Like, why are, he's just an ordinary gardener. Why are all these people dying around him, Right. So it's a very delicate balance. So I think I'm a little more discerning now on what kind of characters I create.
That makes sense. And that goes perfectly into my next question, which is, in addition to Moss, you wrote several other series, which is with such characters as Layla Santiago and Officer Ellie Rush. How did you want these stories to be different? And you kind of talked about a little bit, you wanted them to be a little more active.
Yeah. So I purposely created someone in law enforcement. She's a bicycle cop, though, and it's like, I don't, there's many people who do the police procedurals. That's not my area of expertise. Although I did take, before the pandemic, a lot of, well, I think they still have it in Pasadena, but you could take these like citizen academies. So I took one with the ATF, and they're at the time they were on brand in Glendale, and it was like 8 weeks, and it's alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, also arson. Really fascinating. They gave us like we had to simulate like a drug bust with a group of other people in the class, and it was like this rubber kind of gun, and it was like, yeah, I normally don't write about those kind of things, so it was kind of eye-opening to me, and I just wanted to kind of challenge myself, because Moss was so close to me personally. Well, let's explore different things. So yeah, that was the bicycle cop Ellie Rush, but again, I could still write about downtown LA, which I loved, and I knew Little Tokyo. I didn't work for the flower market. I knew Toy Town, and I had worked at the Biltmore Hotel right after I graduated high
Did
school.
you really?
Yeah, for a summer. So, all these places. I had worked for a law firm right there on Flower Street. So it was just fun to kind of revisit those places. Leilani, Santiago, just in Kauai, like who doesn't want to go to Kauai? So I was challenging myself, writing about occupations that I wasn't necessarily that familiar with, and place. I love Kauai. We honeymooned there and we spent some time there, but I'm not from Hawaii, so it was kind of a risk. And I there's some pigeon in there, but one of my readers, she's very concerned when she found out I was writing something in Hawaii, so she volunteered to look over my pigeon, and which was very nice of her. So, yeah, so I think that all that kind of prepared me to go on to write my other books, my historical books. Yeah.
So there's how many books in either series?
They're only they're just two
Two
in
there.
each. Yeah.
So what topics or themes do you want to explore? Kind of looking at these other series or
Oh,
other
what did I
books.
want to?
Yeah, what did you want to explore with these other projects?
I think I was kind of curious. One was like city politics. And your average reader is not going to pick up on any of this, but redevelopment, that was something when I was working at the Rafu Shimpo, that was a really big issue and totally unsexy. Who wants to read about that? But trying to, have there's a census worker who was a victim in the first one. And then I also wanted to look at other ethnicities. So, the first one is about the Vietnamese American community. The bicycle cop's best friend is a Cambodian American woman. And just being in LA, we're not siloed, with just our one ethnic group. We're constantly bumping, elbows with so many other people. They might even been married into our family. And I wanted to be, to kind of pursue that a little bit more. And it's tricky. It's really tricky, but I think especially if you're going to write about a big city, I mean, it's kind of important to write about other types of people and cultures.
It is. And especially in a city that's so diverse as Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's really, I can't even imagine how challenging it is because there's so many different ways to go to try to find like one particular area to go and one area and one avenue to kind of go down. And make that decision. It must be really kind of challenging to kind of chart a course. I mean, how planned is the storyline? I mean, is this something that you chart a course kind of as you go, or do you have an idea? Is it organic, or do you have is the story kind of written before you start writing? Or does it kind of flow as you kind of go?
A lot of times I don't know who killed the person.
Interesting.
Until maybe I'm 2/3. I go, oh, okay, that person, they tipped their hand, they did it. But with the Masarai books, it was always started with the clue.
Okay.
because he was such a weird, unusual character. It's like, how come Master Arai can figure this out, but the LAPD and the NYPD, they don't know? It has to be something in his
Yeah.
wheelhouse. And the other ones, uh, there's just certain I do lean on things that I know and gravitate towards or am interested in. And one of the Leilani, the first one, Leilani, it's kind of a traditional slash cozy, and the family's into shaved ice. They sell shaved ice. And actually that was a big part of me growing up in Altadena. We had like a little manual like snow cone maker like from Japan, and so I kind of entered in to certain things that I was familiar about. But I think the issues, whether it's like Hawaii, like and that's common with a lot of Hawaiian stories about Hawaii, like who owns the land and those kind of issues. But then I also had to insert the California surfers. So I spent a lot of time in all these surf museums in Orange County and Oceanside, and try to learn what I could about surfboards. So it also has to be fun. There has to be some discovery there. And once I get all those elements together, and I have to get usually the right name for the characters, then they kind of tell me, they point the way for where the story's supposed to go.
So you don't have a master board that lays everything out?
I don't. I know a lot of my colleagues do. I mostly just work on Word. I don't have a fancy program, and I just kind of need, although before I do that, I do work from a physical journal, and I'm brainstorming, and everyone gives me journals, and I kind of pick out, okay, which one is the right journal for this story, and then I start, you know, um, handwriting, character names, and trying to untangle that kind of the ball, and when certain things start to come forward, then I start to get on the computer and start typing.
Well, I picked up Clark and Division. I haven't started it yet.
Okay.
I have young kids.
Okay.
So I usually do books on tape.
Okay.
But I'm like, I need to pick up a book and I should start reading it yet.
Okay.
Is there anything that I should be on the lookout for in Clark and Division? You have any thoughts?
Well, what's interesting so Clark and Division, that's my first historical mystery. A lot of my novels are set, contemporary, but there's like a cold case. There's some nod to history in the past, but this one takes place in 1944 Chicago. You would be interested because the family is from a place called Tropical. I don't know if you've heard that name, and it's present-day Atwater.
Oh, okay.
So the intersection of Glendale and Los Angeles. And one reason why I wanted to write about Tropical is when a person I interviewed told me that he had been raised there. I go, where is, and just the name. And I think there's a couple businesses, just like Crown City. There's a couple businesses with that name.
Yeah.
Still, or maybe the train station.
Right.
Yeah.
Because there was a Cuban restaurant that was called Tropical that I think just closed. And I was curious to see why.
Was it Tropical or Tropico?
Oh,
C-O. This is C-O, yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I'll have to think about that.
But that had been an early place that Japanese immigrants had gone to grow strawberries, and then it kind of changed. But speaking of Silver Lake area, my husband, he taught at John Marshall High School.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah. So it was like, so that's where my characters, they go to high school, but it's in the 1930s. And that's where, in terms of research, newspapers are so helpful to me. And even going on ancestry.com, super helpful. And because I know that they also have a website just with yearbooks. But I just, a lot of people load their historic yearbooks onto Ancestry. So I was able to see some yearbooks from John Marshall High School about the time my characters had graduated. And it was very, very helpful there. I think with Clark and Division, I would say is kind of my breakthrough book. in terms of um, in terms of sales, it's done better than any of my other books. I think it's my number. It might be my 13th novel, and it did come out in hardcover. And then most of my other books are paperback originals, which is a fine format. But I think once you have a publisher that kind of pushes, you're in hardcover and they push it, certain review outlets are more open, to looking at your books. So, total surprise, it was written and rewritten during the pandemic. It came out in August 2021. I didn't know how it would be received. It's not like a traditional mystery. You don't see the dead body or for a while. And I credit my editor, Juliet Grams, because she was the one who kept saying, "Slow down, Naomi. We need to see the family's life in Tropical. And then the family goes to Manzanar. We need to see Manzanar more." And then it's told from a younger sister's point of view. The older sister goes to Chicago, and then which was not that was the number one destination for Japanese Americans coming from the 10 camps, and it was mostly young people, young adults, because they had American citizenships. Immigrants couldn't be naturalized, Japanese couldn't, so it was easier for them to get leave clearance. So Rose goes first, and Rose again is a nod to Pasadena. And then later, Aki, my main character, and her parents follow, only to discover something terrible has happened to Rose. So that's, the whole investigation. I think you will enjoy it.
I know. Well, in the book, you have actually a little bit about Manzanar in it.
Mm-hmm.
You had a little bit of history in the back, which I think is really important. And you also have, I think it's recipes in the back as well, and there's some like notes for book clubs. Why did you insert those kind of elements in the book? Why was that important to you?
Well, that's actually my publisher. That's what they wanted to do. When the book came out in hardcover, they did that. The elements that are in the paperback right now, that was like a separate kind of special feature.
Okay.
That they mailed out to people. So, which I appreciated. They wanted to give it more context, and a lot of book clubs, they do like to, I've done like Masarai book clubs like in Phoenix, and they had Japanese food there. So that's just, part of like some book clubs, what they like to do. So
I love having the historical context of it. I mean, I think it's the responsibility of readers to kind of know what the topics are and do their own research and understand kind of what's happening. But I think having the kind of a summary in the book is important as well for people that aren't going to do the research. I hope they will, and I think it's important that they do. But for those people that don't, I think it's good to have the couple pages, at least to have a summary of what Manzanar is, things like that. So we're recording in May, which is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Are there people in Los Angeles whose stories you believe are especially inspiring?
That's such a good question. What I've been learning about is, since I'm a writer and in the arts community, that all these kind of pioneering artists and writers, and a lot of came from the Arroyo area. And in one of the nonfiction book that I co-wrote with Geraldine Nance. Geraldine Nance is a former port director, but she did a deep dive in these folks, like Charles Lummis, but a lot of these women that lived in the Arroyo, and they actually were squatters in Terminal Island. They formed arts communities, and I find that just like really fascinating, and kind of, that's what I do in communities. I belong to Sisters in Crimes and other, more informal groups, and how we're trying to really support each other, have fun, and kind of get our stories down. So yeah, and right now I'm, working on my manuscript, as you mentioned, about Pasadena, 1903, called Crown City. And that's all about like Japanese immigrant artists and carpenters who came over here because there was this huge craze about Japanese art in Pasadena. So that's been fascinating to me. and it includes even like silent film artists and all that, people who would go on to make their star in Hollywood. So really fascinating stuff.
Can you say any more about that book, or is that all you can say about it?
Oh no, it's
I don't want to give any.
yeah, no, I mean I think it's going to be really fun. And James, we have to do something next year.
Okay.
It's probably going to come out next summer,
Okay,
but
great.
it is called Crown City. So, and this is Crown City podcast.
It is.
So, and I've wanted to write about Pasadena for the longest time, but I just couldn't figure out like how, you know, uh, it's, I write mysteries, so, Pasadena is not viewed as a very, dark place. It's like so gorgeous. So what's the story of Pasadena? Why am I here? And through this research that goes back a century, it's like, okay, now I'm beginning to understand.
So what year does it take place again?
1903.
So what was happening in Pasadena in 1903 that's so interesting?
Well, it was just the beginning. Green and Green brothers, the architects, they did their first residential home, right there. And it wasn't Colorado Boulevard, it was Colorado Street. And again, it, just blocks walking distance from where I live. There's a good I don't know if you've gone to Cars, that place that has the really yummy chocolate croissants.
I have.
Yeah, so that's really close. But just a little bit north of there is this home, this office building, and right there on Catalina, and that was the Green and Green home. I mean that was her first residential home that they had built for someone else, called the Sanborn House. And I can't tell you how many times on dog walks I would pass it. And I kind of noticed the eaves were kind of longer. There was like some kind of Japanese aesthetic there. And then I come to, see, oh, this is part of the Green and Green brothers legacy. And yeah, so I didn't realize that Pasadena was the second oldest city in LA County. I don't know if you knew that. I didn't know that. But just this attraction of all these people, from wealthy people from the East Coast and the Midwest, and on top of that, how people were coming from the Pacific and meeting the demand for all this Japanese and Asian art. It's really interesting intersection.
Well, you released a children's book this year, which was titled A Children's Introduction to Asian American and Pacific Islander History. So how did that book kind of come about?
I had done during a lot of things came out of the pandemic.
Like this podcast.
So, but it also points to relation. I told you how I had multiple agents and multiple this, multiple that. One of my agents became a children's book editor at Running Press. It's one of the Hachette imprints, and I had done a work for hire for her during the pandemic, and it was kind of doing a deep dive. It was kind of related, it was for the Smithsonian's Asian Pacific American Center, and looking at 30 like amazing Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And for them, they did like 15 out of the 30 were Pacific Islanders. So this is where I grew. I had to do a lot of research, understand. I was already interested in places like the Marshall Islands, but looking at Guam and, Samoa, things that I didn't know that much. And then there was this opportunity from a sister book. I guess they were happy with my work, and it's part of a series, A Child's Introduction, like to astronomy, A Child's Introduction. And again, it was about Asian American Pacific Island history. So they were kind enough to ask me to write it. And it was really fun.
What do you think that we should be teaching our children about AAPI history?
I think there's a couple of I think one is how like immigration laws have really affected, from banning people, and many times I think the first group of people that, especially Californians, were overtly discriminating against in terms of immigrants were Chinese. It's like, come and do do this backbreaking labor on the railroads and do, these things that were very dangerous. But then it's like, okay, we don't really want you anymore. So that was those kind of anti-Chinese, those exclusion acts really had an adverse effect on groups of people. So I think that legacy, but then things kind of opened up in the 1960s, something that President Johnson had signed, and that's how we have such a big influx of, um, especially educated, but yeah, Asian immigrants. And so, it's really, and the other side of it, I think, is with the Pacific Islanders is their kind of weird status. It's like you're kind of part of us, but you're not. You can't vote, but you could, it's things that really don't make that much sense. And I think it's good for us to have a larger understanding, of those relationships. Yeah.
Well, we're getting low on time, but I want to talk about your love of sports because we were talking about this beforehand. Because you you follow the Dodgers, but you actually are a sports fan in general.
Yeah.
And you played basketball.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about sports in general and basketball and just your enjoyment and love of sports?
Well, James, you have to know about the Pasadena Bruins. Never heard of them,
No.
right? I was a Pasadena Bruin. That's how it was. It's a Japanese American basketball league, and it has some history. It goes back to, like, I don't know, maybe the 50s or 60s, when Japanese Americans were prevented from, actively joining certain sports leagues in large numbers. So these community leaders created these leagues. So I'm a sixth grader. I'm not. I'm short now, and I was even shorter then, and that's how I learned basketball. I was, point guard, and this wasn't a time where, I mean, now look at women's basketball. It's like eclipsing like men's college basketball. But back then, like, team sports for girls was not encouraged. So if you knew the game at that age and you could, dribble a ball, and I could steal, that was so. When it came to at South Pasadena middle school and high school, I was on the basketball team. I didn't go up to varsity because I knew I would be just sitting on the bench. But yeah, so it was a good training ground. Yeah, so there's a lot of Japanese Americans who are huge basketball fans, even more so maybe than even baseball. But yeah, but I follow a lot of college sports. I love women's volleyball too, college. Yeah, women's volleyball. And it just, what I like about it is anyone can excel,
Right.
right? If they can do whatever they can, it's just open. And I love, I, 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 these days for March Madness for college, it used to be they would get into the stories, of all the players, and now they've cut back. And now you can't even figure out where to watch a lot of these games. They're on so many different channels. But I think that's really fascinating too, the backstories of these players, so that's feeds kind of my narrative, my love for narratives. So I think those, and it's so contained, maybe it's like a mystery novel. There's a certain expectation. It's like 4 quarters or 2 halves or whatever, and everyone kind of knows the rules, but anything can still happen with that kind of structure, and that's kind of fun. And I think it transcends, language. It transcends a lot of things, which is kind of fun.
Well, basketball is unique, and I don't follow basketball as much as I should. But from what I understand, it's a player-driven league, which it's not as much of a team-driven league, but it's a player-driven league. So you follow the Steph Currys, you follow LeBron James. Um, so it's you follow those players as opposed to the teams, which is kind of interesting. You follow the Caitlin Clarks or those particular players. So you follow that story, that character, which is kind of interesting. and you were at a Dodger game last week, which is kind of neat. I saw you post on Instagram, um, because Moss was a Dodger fan, um, which is I follow, which is kind of neat. Does the resurgence at the Dodgers have a resurgence in Japanese players? The Dodgers, and hopefully they'll sign another a Japanese player, Roki Sasaki, from the Japanese league. Hopefully, we'll see. But it's interesting that you follow sports and that you played basketball for the Pasadena Bruins.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Look them up. They're on they have their own website, I think.
So point guard, which is a really important player, and it's interesting that you were really good at stealing.
You have to anticipate where the ball is going, right? And that's kind of a skill, like to write a mystery too.
I was going to make that parallel. Yeah. You took my line. Well, there's a question I want to ask, because in addition to the mystery stuff, the mystery of novels, you've written some really important nonfiction as well. And it goes to the fact that your parents were both survivors of the Hiroshima bombing. And you've written, let me go back to some of my notes. Jeff will cut this part out. So you're an award-winning mystery writer, but you've also written about some of the most interesting and tragic events in our recent history. You've written 8 nonfiction books. For example, Life After Manzanar and Terminal Island. You're recently on with Larry Mantle talking about Terminal Island. How do you approach these immense topics, and how do you try to capture the impact that these incredible events have had on these people?
I guess I do go about it by getting to people's stories. And luckily, when I did a lot of that work, people were still alive. Terminal Island is my last big nonfiction book, and a lot of those interviews took place maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and it was kind of crucial to kind of get people at that time. And I think the things I look for are not only the maudlin, but the experiences and kind of the personal strength that people had, the resilience they had to get through that. And a lot of times it gives me hope when we're going through really hard times as well. Just like I think with Clark and Division, as well as Life After Manzanar tells the real life stories behind like Clark and Division and the resettlement process. And when we were in lockdown during COVID, just thinking, oh, yeah, I think I get a sense of what it would be like to be in confinement, during World War II, and just like your life turned upside down, and just kind of seeing how different people react to something like that. There's so many different reactions. Some people lose their minds, some people get angry, some people just go with the flow, some people just hang out with their family. It's just, and so it gave me insight. Like, okay, I have and through writing those stories and having them published, they kind of speak back to me later,
right.
And then kind of like being my cheerleader, like, you could get through. We got through this. You can get through whatever you're going through too. Yeah.
As we wind down our conversation, I have one final question, which is the fun question at the end of the conversation, which is, if you could design a perfect day in Pasadena from breakfast to late night, what would you do? Where would you go? And what would you eat and drink?
Oh boy. Did you give me this question before?
I did. It stumps everybody.
Yeah. I did. Probably, okay, I would.
You could take your time.
Oh, no. Let's see. Okay. So I would actually go to Cars. I don't know what what it stands for, but it's like the chocolate place right there on
Colorado.
Colorado. Yeah, so I would have to kind of go early because it gets crowded.
It does.
Yeah, so and get like a big fat chocolate croissant and maybe some tea and just kind of enjoy that. And there's some regulars that uh, have kind of become, not that I go there that often, but it just so happens I know some of the regulars and just kind of chit chat with them. And a big part of my Pasadena day is walking my dog. So, and this, does it have to be in Pasadena?
It doesn't have to.
Yeah. So I have to admit that I'm really partial to Lacey Park right now. And I know they're viewed as being elitist because they charge money on the weekends if you don't live there.
They do.
Yeah. But I have to say, I have lost my keys 2 times in that park. And they have been returned to me.
Have they really?
The latest incident was someone from the Temple City Library contacted me and they had my keys. So someone had gone to Lacey Park, found my keys, had actually gone there because I had 3 library cards like on my key ring. They went to Pasadena Library. I guess they weren't that helpful, but then they went to the local one.
Yeah.
And I got my keys back. So I don't know. I think there's something about the people there that are, hey, they have my back. So I really like them. And it's a wonderful place to just like go on walks and things like that. Um, Gosh. So for lunch, let's see. Yeah, gosh, that's a really good one. Well, I have to admit lately, I'm going to Italy later this year. So I've been on a Italian kick. So I'll probably go to Uvo.
Okay.
Yeah, which is walking distance from me. I know it's a mini chain, but I would still, yeah, and I really like to sit at a counter. I like to eat that way, and they have a really nice counter there. So I would get my lunch there. Um, and I love movies. I like plays too. So maybe a matinee, and this is weird, but I know it's very uncomfortable, but my husband and I, we've been going to the Academy a lot. The price is just right, and they've been showing like the same movies.
Yeah.
So, yeah, even though it's not the most comfortable, I probably go to the region, Academy and catch something there. And another spot, maybe if there's in between another garden, I'm a big fan of the Arlington Community Garden, so that's a big favorite for me as well. And yeah, and maybe, get some sushi at Osawa on Raymond, and then I do like the Armory for their free shows and maybe, stop by there and yeah, and maybe end it with a play. And it could be at the Boston Court, which is really close, or go to the Ice House and see comedy.
Sounds like a great day.
Yeah.
Well, Naomi, thank you for creating such immersive and interesting stories, for your work preserving Japanese American culture here in Los Angeles, and for coming on the podcast. I greatly appreciate it.
You're welcome.
While continuing our collaboration, the featured song is All Right Here by Pasadena's own The Next Doors. Please follow them on social media and at thenextdoorsmusic.com. I want to thank everyone here at Pasadena Media, George, Chris, Bobby, Liza, and especially Terry, Jeff, and Jasiri, and Bob, new member of the team, for their special guidance and assistance. For more information about Pasadena Media, please visit pasadenamedia.org. For more information about and to support this podcast, please visit thecrowncitypodcast.com. Until next time, please remember to stay well, read more mystery stories, and as always, I will see you around town. you.